The Amish have been making bone broth the same way for over 200 years. And by the end of this video, you will know exactly how they do it. All 10 broths. Every one of them made from parts of the animal that modern kitchens throw away. But here's what nobody will tell you. The reason these broths work has nothing to do with what the modern world thinks it knows about bones and water. The Amish do something different, something most people skip. And that one thing, that one step, is the difference between broth that sits flat like flavored water and broth that sets into a trembling jelly overnight in the icebox. Number 3 on this list is where I explain exactly what that step is. An Amish woman, 81 years old, still working the garden every morning at 5, told a visitor that she had not missed a day of broth in over 40 years. The visitor asked what kind. She said, "Whatever bones we have." The visitor asked what it does. She looked at him like the question was strange. "It keeps us moving." That is the whole philosophy. Not complicated, not scientific, just it keeps us moving. 10 broths, 2 centuries of practice. Let us start. Number 10. Turkey carcass broth. The day after a turkey is eaten in an Amish household, nothing goes in the trash. Nothing. The carcass, picked mostly clean, ribs cracked, spine exposed, goes into the largest pot in the kitchen before anyone sits down to breakfast the next morning. Cold water, an onion cut in half, maybe a carrot, maybe not. Depends on the kitchen, depends on the woman, depends on what the garden gave that week. And then, this is the part that matters. Low heat for the rest of the day. Not a boil. Not even close to a boil. A shimmer. The surface barely moving. Like the water is thinking about boiling but has not made up its mind yet. 6 hours. Sometimes 8. Nobody sets a timer. Nobody checks a clock. In an Amish kitchen, and I need to say this because it changes how you understand everything on this list, there is no timer. There is no alarm. There is just the stove, the pot, and a woman who has been doing this since she was tall enough to see over the rim. She knows when it is ready the way she knows when the bread is done or when the storm is coming. She knows. Turkey broth comes out lighter than beef, lighter than pork. But there is something in it, a depth, a roundness that catches you off guard. You expect it to taste thin? It does not. The dark meat still clinging to the carcass gives it body. The cartilage along the spine dissolves into something you cannot see but you can feel in the texture. And by hour 5 or 6, what you have in that pot is not water with turkey flavor. It is something else. Something that coats the inside of the cup and stays warm in the chest long after the last sip. The Amish do not waste a carcass the way they do not waste daylight. Both are finite. Both are given. Both deserve to be used completely. Ask an Amish woman why she keeps the carcass, and she will look at you the way she looks at someone who leaves the barn door open in winter. The question answers itself. Number 9. Ham bone and root vegetable broth. The Amish salt and smoke their own hams. Salt, smoke, time. Weeks of hanging in the smokehouse until the meat darkens and the smell seeps into the wood of the building itself. When the ham is finally eaten, usually on a Sunday, usually with the extended family, the bone goes nowhere. The bone stays. That bone, dropped into a pot with turnips and parsnips and celery root pulled from the garden that morning, produces something that does not taste like broth. It tastes like smoke and earth and winter all at once. The root vegetables break down slowly, thickening the liquid without any flour or starch. The smoked ham bone gives up its flavor in waves. First salt, then smoke. Then something deeper that does not have a name, but you recognize it anyway. You recognize it because it smells like a kitchen that has been cooking all day, even if you have never been in that particular kitchen. Here is a detail I did not expect. The Amish do not peel the root vegetables. The turnips go in with their skin. The parsnips go in whole. The celery root, that ugly, knobby thing that looks like something you would find growing on a cave wall, gets scrubbed, not peeled, and dropped in rough chopped. Why? Because the skin holds flavor that the flesh does not. And because peeling takes time and creates waste, and Amish kitchens are not interested in either. A bowl of this in January, when the ground is frozen and the mornings come slow and stiff. That is not just food. That is the reason you get out of bed. That is the smell that meets you at the bottom of the stairs and tells you that someone was up before you, and the stove is already warm, and the day has already started whether your body is ready or not. Number 8. Deer bone broth. Not every Amish community hunts, but many do. And when a deer is brought home in late autumn, the bones do not go to the dogs. Not yet. Deer bones are leaner than beef, harder, denser. They do not give up their contents easily, as one would. You have to be patient with them the way you have to be patient with anything wild. 8 hours minimum, sometimes 12. The broth that comes out is different from any domestic animal. Thinner, cleaner, with a faintly mineral edge that tastes, if you will forgive the description, like the woods themselves decided to become soup. This was the seasonal broth, the winter broth, made only when the deer was fresh and the cold had settled in deep enough that every joint in the body seemed to tighten. Amish women, and I should note it was always the women who decided what went in the pot and for how long, served this in the morning. Not as a meal before the meal. A cup of deer bone broth before breakfast, the way some people drink coffee. Except this was not about waking up the mind. It was about waking up the body, getting everything loose, getting everything warm, getting everything ready for a day that was going to ask a lot of it. Why deer specifically, I asked. The answer I got was not scientific. It was not even logical. Wild animals move better than tame ones, so their bones carry something different. Is that true? I do not know, but the women who said it had been moving just fine for 80 years, so I did not argue. If you are watching this and you have not subscribed yet, do it now. Not for me. For you. Because this channel exists to keep knowledge like this from disappearing, and the algorithm only shows it to more people if you tell it to. Hit subscribe, hit the bell, and drop a comment. I want to know if your family ever made broth from wild game. Those stories matter. Number 7. Chicken gizzard and heart broth. This one is the one that most people will not make. Not because it is difficult, because it sounds wrong. Gizzards and hearts. The insides. The parts that come in that little bag stuffed inside the cavity of a whole chicken that almost everyone in the modern world pulls out and throws directly into the garbage without opening. The Amish open it. The Amish use every piece. Gizzards. Tough, muscular, dark, and hearts. Small, dense, surprisingly tender when cooked long enough. Go into a pot with water and an onion. Simmer for 3 hours. What comes out is a broth that is darker than any other chicken broth you have ever seen. Almost brown. With a mineral taste, earthy, dark, deep. That is nothing like the golden broth from backs and necks. The old women called this the strong broth. Not strong in flavor, strong in purpose. This was the broth for someone who was pale, tired, dragging through the day like they were pulling a weight behind them. A cup of this in the morning and, well, they said it put color back in the face. Whether it was the broth or the belief in the broth, I cannot tell you. But the result was the same. And here's the thing. Gizzards and hearts cost almost nothing. At any store that sells whole chickens, they are either included free or sold for pennies. The most overlooked ingredient in the entire store is the one the Amish have been using for 200 years. Number 6. Pork hock broth. Every autumn, every community, hog butchering day. This is not a metaphor, it is a real day. Families gather before dawn. The hogs, raised all year, fed on scraps and grain and whatever the garden did not need, are slaughtered and processed from nose to tail in a single day. Sometimes 2 days. Every cut, every organ, every bone, every scrap of fat is accounted for. Nothing is left. Nothing is wasted. Nothing. The hockus at the ankle joint, packed with cartilage and wrapped in skin and connective tissue, is set aside specifically for broth. Not soup, not stew, broth. Because the Amish understood something about joints. They understood that the parts of the animal closest to the joint, the knuckle, the hock, the foot, held something that the muscle meat did not, something that only came out with time and low heat and patience. Pork hock broth simmers for 6 hours, maybe 8. The hock collapses slowly, the skin melts, the cartilage dissolves. What remains is a broth so thick it barely pours when cooled. Dense, almost viscous, with a faint smokiness even when the hock has not been smoked, because pork carries that ghost of flavor in its bones the way oak carries it in its wood. 1 pot, 1 hock, 3 days of broth. The math was not complicated, but the discipline, raising the animal, butchering it properly, saving the right parts, simmering them long enough, that was 200 years of accumulated knowledge in a single cup. Here is what most people get wrong about bone broth. And I mean almost everyone. They boil it. They put bones in water, Crank the heat, bring it to a rolling boil, and leave it there. And what they get is cloudy, bitter, thin broth that tastes like dishwater, and they conclude that bone broth is overrated and move on. The Amish never boil their broth. Ever. The heat stays low, the surface barely moves. A shimmer, not a bubble. The difference sounds small, but it changes everything. A boil breaks the fat into the liquid and makes it murky. A boil releases bitter compounds from the bones. A boil agitates the proteins until they cloud the broth and ruin the texture. A simmer, patient, slow, almost invisible, coaxes everything out gently, cleanly. The broth stays clear, the flavor stays pure, and the body of the liquid, that thick, gelatinous quality that makes real broth real, only develops under low heat over long hours. If you have been making bone broth and it comes out thin and watery, this is why. You were too fast. You were too hot. The bones needed more time and less heat, and nobody told you because the people who knew, the Amish, the old farm women, the grandmothers who never owned a cookbook, are not the ones writing articles on the internet. Now you know. And number 3 explains the other thing most people skip. The one ingredient that changes everything. Number 5. Oxtail broth. The darkest broth on this list. The heaviest. The one that feels like it weighs something in the cup. Oxtail. The tail of the cow. Each segment of vertebra wrapped in meat and cartilage and connective tissue so dense, it takes 6 hours of simmering before it even begins to loosen. The Amish used every part of the animal, but the tail held a particular place. It was not eaten as meat. It was not roasted or fried. It was simmered, only simmered. Because the tail existed, in their understanding, to make broth. That was its purpose. That was its job. 6 to 8 hours in a pot of water. Bay leaf. A few peppercorns. Nothing else. The meat fell off in dark, soft threads. The cartilage between each vertebra melted, and the broth turned a color that was closer to coffee than to the golden chicken broth most people picture when they hear the word broth. Almost opaque. Rich in a way that was not about flavor, but about substance. About weight. This was the winter broth. The deep winter broth. The one made when the cold was not just outside, but had gotten inside. Into the joints, into the back, into the hips that ached every morning when you swung your legs off the bed. A cup of this and the aching did not vanish, but it loosened. Something shifted. Something warmed. Like the broth was reaching the same place as the cold had reached and gently pushing it back. You cannot explain that to someone who has not felt it. You can only hand them the cup and say drink, and wait, because the body knows. The body has always known. If you are still here, and you are, which tells me something about you, share this video with someone whose morning starts stiff. Someone whose body reminds them every day that it is carrying years. Because what comes next, the last 4 on this list, are the ones that carry the most weight. The roasted marrow bone, the vinegar secret, the chicken feet, and the pot that never goes empty. Number 4. Roasted marrow bone broth. Every other broth on this list starts with raw bones and cold water. This one does not. This one starts in the oven. The marrow bones, thick, heavy, cut into 3-inch pieces by the butcher or by the family themselves, went into the wood-fired oven first. No oil, no seasoning. Just the bones on a pan, roasted until the cut ends turned dark, and the marrow inside began to bubble. 20 minutes, maybe 30, the kitchen filled with a smell that was not like cooking. It was like the earth opening up. Then, and only then, the roasted bones went into the pot. Cold water. A splash of apple cider vinegar. And this is important. The vinegar was not for flavor. The Amish grandmothers said the vinegar pulled more from the bones. That is the way they said it. Pulled more. They did not explain what more was. They did not need to. They just knew that broth made with vinegar set firmer than broth made without, and broth that set firm was broth that worked. 8 hours minimum. Overnight if the stove could hold a steady low flame. And what came out the next morning was the densest, richest broth of them all. The roasting had changed the bones, deepened them, concentrated them, unlocked something that raw bones in water alone could not reach. It was the difference between a photograph and a painting of the same thing. Both are the subject, but one has more depth. This was the broth they gave to the person who had been stiff all winter, the one whose body had locked up, the one who moved slow in the morning and slower by afternoon. A cup a day, every day, not for a week, for the whole season. Number 3, beef knuckle and vinegar broth. This is the one I mentioned in the beginning, the one where the Amish do something different. Something most people skip. Beef knuckles, the joint bones, the rounded ends where one bone meets another, covered in cartilage, dense with connective tissue, filled with a dark, spongy marrow unlike the smooth marrow in the straight shank bones. And the Amish, this is the part, always added vinegar. Not a little. A tablespoon per quart of water. Apple cider vinegar made at home, from their own apples pressed in their own cider presses. The vinegar went in at the very start, with the cold water before the heat was even turned on. Why? Because the vinegar draws from the bones what water alone leaves behind. It softens the cartilage faster. It pulls from the dense knuckle ends the thick, sticky substance that makes the broth set into jelly when it cools. Without vinegar, the broth is good. With vinegar, the broth is different. Fundamentally different. Thicker, heavier, more gelatinous. The kind of broth that does not pour, it slides. 12 to 24 hours of simmering, a full day. Sometimes they started it at night and let it go through until the next evening. The women checked it the way they checked the garden. Not anxiously, not frequently, just a glance every few hours to make sure the water level was right and the flame was low. That was all. The broth did its own work. You just had to not rush it. The test was always the same. Dip a spoon. Let it cool on the back of your hand. If it clings and does not run, done. If it drips like water, the bones have more to give. Put the lid back. Walk away. Come back tomorrow. If you have been making bone broth without vinegar, this is your answer. This is the missing piece. And it has been sitting in every Amish kitchen for 200 years. Leave a like on this video. Tell me in the comments, have you been using vinegar? Or is this the first time you are hearing this? I want to know, because the simplest changes are always the ones that nobody thinks to try. Number 2, chicken foot broth. Most people will not touch them. Chicken feet. Yellow, scaly, clawed, strange. Everything about them says, throw this away. Everything about them is wrong for a modern kitchen that wants food to look clean and packaged and nothing like the animal it came from. The Amish do not have that problem. Chicken feet go into the broth pot the same way everything else goes in. Without hesitation, without apology, without a moment of squeamishness. Because the women who run those kitchens understand something that 2 centuries of unbroken practice has confirmed. Chicken feet produce a broth that is more concentrated, more gelatinous, more dense with whatever it is that makes broth set into jelly than any other part of the bird. More than the carcass. More than the back. More than the neck. Foot by foot, they are the single most potent source of what bones have to offer. You clean them first, scald in boiling water, peel the outer skin, clip the nails, the nails, into the pot with cold water and vinegar. 3 to 4 hours. The feet collapse slowly, the cartilage dissolves, the tiny bones soften, and what remains in the pot is, I need to be honest, alarming looking. A broth so thick it barely moves. When cooled, it is not liquid, it is solid, a trembling golden jelly that you have to reheat before you can drink it. That jelly is the sign. The Amish women have a rule. If the broth does not set into jelly overnight, it is not ready. Something was wrong, the heat was too high, the time was too short, the feet were not enough. Jelly means the bones gave everything. Anything less means they did not. This was the broth for the body that had forgotten how to move smoothly. The knees, the hands, the shoulders, the lower back. A cup of this in the morning, every morning, and, according to the women who have been making it their entire lives, the body remembers. Slowly. Not overnight, but it remembers. Number 1, the perpetual pot. This was not a recipe. This was a way of life. In Amish farmhouses, the old ones, the ones heated by a single wood-burning stove that was never allowed to go fully cold, a large pot sat on the back of that stove. It was always there. It was always warm. And it was never, ever empty. Every bone from every meal went in. Chicken bones from Sunday, pork ribs from Wednesday, beef scraps from Friday. Vegetable ends on onion skins, carrot tops, celery leaves went in too. Water was added as the level dropped, and the pot was never fully drained. You ladled out what you needed. You put back what you had. Day after day, week after week. Some families kept the same pot going for an entire season. Fall through spring, 5 months, the broth inside changed every day. Monday tasted like chicken, Thursday tasted like pork, Saturday tasted like everything at once. No 2 cups were the same. And that, honestly, was part of what made it work. Not nutritionally, Psychologically, because you never got tired of it. You never knew what the next cup would taste like. And something about that small unpredictability, that daily surprise, kept you coming back to the pot the way a good conversation keeps you sitting at the table longer than you planned. But it was always rich, always thick, always there. The one constant in a kitchen that served 20 people on Sunday and 2 people on Tuesday, and nobody knew what the next week would bring except that the pot would be warm and the broth would be ready. The Amish have a word for it. Well, a phrase. Dauerkochsuppe, the soup that keeps cooking. It was not a recipe because it had no ingredients list. It had no start and no end. It simply was. The way the stove was. The way the kitchen was. A permanent presence that asked for nothing except the bones you were already going to throw away and the water you could draw from the well. A woman who had kept a perpetual pot for over 30 years was asked what her secret was. She did not talk about bones or water or temperature. She said, "I never let it go empty." That is it. That is the entire philosophy of Amish broth making, compressed into 6 words. Never let it go empty. Keep adding. Keep simmering. Keep ladling out what is needed. The pot does not care what the bones are. It takes what you give it and turns it into something that keeps people standing. 10 broths. 200 years. One unbroken line of women who stood at a stove and understood something that the modern kitchen has forgotten. That the parts of the animal nobody wants are the parts the body needs most. The feet, the knuckles, the joints, the tails, the gizzards. The bones that the grocery store buries on the bottom shelf and the butcher gives away because nobody asked for them. The Amish ask for them. The Amish have always asked for them. And here is the part that should bother you. It bothers me. The knowledge these women carry, which bones to use, how long to simmer, when to add the vinegar, how to tell if the broth is ready by the way it clings to a spoon. That knowledge is not written in any book. It lives in the hands of women who are 80, 85, 90 years old. And when those women are gone, the knowledge goes with them. Unless someone asks. Unless someone stands next to them at that stove and says, "Show me." That is what is disappearing, not the recipe. The feel of it. The way she tilts the pot to check the color. The way she holds her hand over the surface to feel the heat without a thermometer. The way she knows, just knows, that the bones have not given up everything yet. You cannot Google that. You can only learn it from standing next to someone who has done it 1,000 times. And those people are running out. The Amish, 80, 90 years old, still working, still moving, still bending and lifting and walking to the barn every morning at 5, did not get that way by accident. They got that way because the pot was always warm and the broth was always there and nobody ever let it go empty. They got that way because every bone from every meal went somewhere. Not the trash, not the dog, the pot. Because nothing was wasted. Because the animal that fed the family gave everything it had, and the family honored that by using every last piece. There is a lesson in that. Not just about broth. About everything. The modern world tells you that the old ways are outdated, that what your grandmother knew has been replaced by something better, something faster, something you can buy in a box and heat in a machine and eat in 4 minutes, standing over the counter. That progress means leaving the kitchen behind and trusting the label instead of trusting the woman who fed you. But progress in this case did not replace. It erased. It took the knowledge out of the kitchen and put it behind a paywall in a pharmacy counter and a subscription service. And in the process, it convinced an entire generation that bones were garbage and broth was a trend. A trend, instead of a 200-year-old tradition that kept people on their feet when nothing else could. The Amish were not convinced, because they never listened to begin with. They do not read the labels. They do not follow the trends. They do not care what the modern kitchen says is efficient or outdated or unnecessary. They care about one thing. Does it work? And the broth works. It has always worked. Their knees tell the story. Their hands tell the story. Their mornings tell the story. Up at 5, moving, bending, lifting, doing what needs to be done year after year after year, long past the age when most people have stopped trying. Make one of these this week. Any of them. The chicken feet if you are brave. The beef knuckle and vinegar if you want the one that changes everything. The turkey carcass if you want to start simple and prove to yourself that the bones you have been throwing away were the most valuable thing in the kitchen all along. But start. That is the only thing that matters. Start. Save the bones from tonight's dinner. Put them in a pot, add water, add a splash of vinegar, turn the heat to low, low, not high, never high, and walk away. Come back in the morning. Dip a spoon. Let it cool on the back of your hand. And if it clings, if it does not run, you did it. You made what the Amish have been making for 200 years, and nobody had to sell it to you. Nobody had to write it on a form. Nobody had to convince you. The bones did the work. You just had to let them. Subscribe. Share this with someone whose mornings start stiff. Someone whose body reminds them every single day that it is carrying years. Tell them about the vinegar. Tell them about the low heat. Tell them about the jelly test, because that is how this knowledge survives. Not in books, not on screens, but the same way it always has. One person telling another. One kitchen at a time. And remember, the Amish did not invent this. They just never stopped doing it. The rest of us did. That is the only difference. And it is the only thing that needs to change.